Black art and culture during the Antebellum Era. We're talking about 1800 to about 1860. Antebellum is a Latin word meaning before the war. The period leading up to the American Civil War is known as the Antebellum Era. For white people, it was a time of optimism, territorial expansion, and political self-determination, spurred by the War of 1812. It was fought by the United States of America and its indigenous allies against the United Kingdom and its allies in British North America, with limited participation by Spain in Florida. It reflected a spirit of growing confidence in a time of population increases, greater urbanization, westward expansion, assisted by technological progress in transportation and communication. With their vast natural resources, unclaimed territories were considered places for expansion and exploration by industry and land barons. The country's economics began shifting in the North to manufacturing as the Industrial Revolution began, while in the South, a cotton boom made plantations the center of the economy. During the 19th century, the South remained almost entirely agricultural, with an economy and a social order largely found on slavery and the plantation system. These mutual dependent institutions produced the staples, especially cotton, from which the South derived its wealth. The seventh president, Andrew Jackson, considered the incarnation of frontier democracy, was elected in 1828. However, in 1814, he led troops against Native Americans in the Creek War and the First Seminole War. The U.S. acquired more land in 1818 when Jackson's troop invaded Spanish Florida to pursue the Seminoles for harboring fugitive slaves. During Andrew Jackson's first administration, the Indian Removal Act was passed in 1830. About 100 million acres of traditional Indian lands were stolen under this law in the North and the South. Many tribes suffered. For instance, the Cherokee Nation was forced to give up its land east of the Mississippi River and migrate to an area in present-day Oklahoma. The Cherokee people call this journey the Trails of Tears because of its devastating effect. The people face hunger, disease, and exhaustion on the forced march. Over 4,000 out of 15,000 Cherokees died. There's more information about the Cherokees. It was about the Trail of Tears. The Cherokees were not the only tribe that suffered, and there will be a video that I want you to watch called The Trail of Tears. But let's continue with Andrew Jackson. Under Jackson's administration, the United States annexed Texas in 1845, precipitating the Mexican War. Mexico's defeat led to the acquisition of California and most of the Southwest. Westward expansion continued. The Pacific Northwest was added in 1846 by a peaceful settlement with Britain. Americans were still looking to Europe for their standard in art and culture, while at the same time developing a national identity. And this, of course, is why you see George Washington here depicted like a Greek god. This was created by the artist Horatio from 1840. During the 1780s and 90s, most states, including those of the Upper South, had free African Americans. Because of the significant immigration of blacks from Haiti and Cuba, they were fleeing the revolutionary struggles in St. Dominguez and the effort of the abolitionist society. After 12 years of upheaval, war, carnage, and betrayal. The revolution in 1791 in San Dominguez finally abolished slavery and achieved independence in Haiti. Slaves in the South remained on the plantation. More slaves were moved to the cities between 1820 and 1840 because of the increasing demand for semi-skilled and skilled laborers in industries and factories. In the 1840s and 1850s, more significant numbers of Southern slaves fled, and free blacks migrated for better job opportunities. Slaves disappeared in free African American communities in the North or escaped to Canada via the Underground Railroad. The African American population remained predominantly enslaved. However, at the end of the 1850s, just before the Civil War, 4 million were free. In 1860, after the election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency, 7 Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederacy, precipitating the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. Frederick Douglass was the most famous black abolitionist in antebellum America. He was the first African American leader of national stature in the U.S. history. Douglass was a brilliant speaker, asked by the American Anti-Slavery Society to go on a lecture tour. He became recognized as one of America's first great speakers. He gained national and international fame when his autobiography was published in 1845. 2 years later, he published an anti-slavery paper called The North Star. Douglass served as an advisor for President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War and fought to adapt the constitutional amendments, guaranteed voting rights and other civil liberties for blacks. Douglass provided a powerful voice for human rights and is still revered for his contributions to civil and racial injustice. After 1820, whites and many free blacks, primarily artisans, owned slaves. Diversification of goods, scarcity of labor, and the high cost of manufactured goods were the reasons for developing the slave artisan class in the antebellum period. The economic advantages were obvious. The master artisan didn't have to start all over again every 2 years with untrained apprentices. The slave owner, whether planter or artisan, ultimately profited from the work of the slave artisan. The Emancipation of 1863 had one major drawback for slave artisans. It forced them to compete in the open market. Hundreds of slave artisans failed to compete and for the remaining decades produced artwork only for their community. During the first 3 decades of the 19th century, the urban slave and the free black artisans dominated the markets. Black artisans created to both the white and the black customers. Free black artisans could also provide manumission for their slave artisans, some of whom were their relatives. Also, they were money lenders. They supplied critical financial resources for African Americans and their community.